Welcome once again to ARTbreak, everyone. Just a quick announcement. Next week's ARTbreak on November 8th will be virtual only, and that means that we won't have any in-house audience, but you can catch that on YouTube. So again, next week, virtual presentation only. Well, hopefully by now, most of you have had a chance to see the exhibit Unmasking Masculinity. And among the things I think that exhibit does so well is really confront and sort of dismantle many of the stereotypes surrounding masculinity. And I think this is particularly the case regarding the pieces that focus on African American men, who have probably been the group most victimized by stereotype throughout history. We like to think in our enlightened age that these blatant stereotypes are, a thing of the past, and maybe they are, but at the same time, stereotypical thinking really persists in our culture, and it's very deeply ingrained, and it comes out in different forms in unexpected ways. And the effect is still devastating for those involved. And I think all the more so because those of us in the larger community are kind of oblivious of it. So to help us understand the history of the social forces that have really shaped Black masculinity, we're very pleased to have with us Kevin Lavender Jr. And Mr. Lavender is also here in his role as the Executive Director of the Fatherhood Network of Kalamazoo, an organization which he founded in 2015. And the goal of the network is to affirm and support the positive roles of fathers, whether they're biological, surrogate, or guardian, and help address the many challenges they face. He's also accompanied by other members of the Fatherhood Network, which you'll meet shortly. I should say, too, that the network also provides an educational role by really confronting the stereotypes specifically formed around Black fathers. And we're very pleased that this is going to be looked at today. So please welcome Kevin Lavender Jr.
Thank you very much. Huge major shout out to the Kalamazoo Institute of Art for hosting this conversation. Wonderful exhibit on masculinity is very important. I'd like to introduce myself first and then my team, my brothers. This is truly a co-labor of love. So again, Kevin Lavender Jr., I'm a proud single father of 3 lovely daughters, 18, 15, and 13 years old. I affectionately call my 3 daughters my 3 queens. So if you hear me say my oldest queen, my middle queen, my youngest queen, I'm talking about my daughters, Alexia, Amaya, and Naomi. I've been here in Kalamazoo since 1997, believe it or not. My family moved here from South Jersey, and I've been involved in community work since then. But here I am here with Ramil, Jacob, and Derek. I'll let them come up and introduce themselves as we dive into this conversation that we entitled, and we came up this title in Atlanta, Georgia on the team retreat called Plantation Politics and the Ripple Effect on Black Fatherhood. So gentlemen, please feel free to come up and introduce yourself.
Good afternoon. My name is Ramil Washburn. I am the Director of E-commerce and NFTs for the Fatherhood Network. I am also a father of 2 beautiful children, 6-year-old, 3-year-old girls. So our purpose, as the gentleman stated earlier in the introduction, very important, and we are glad to be here to provide this presentation to you all.
All right, thanks everyone. My name is Jacob Mabry Penny Johnson. I serve as the Director of Health and Housing for the Fatherhood Network. I'm also a 4th generation Kalamazoo native. I want to give thanks for all of the fathers and men who came before us, who enable us to speak here before you. And I specifically want to give thanks to my father, a Vietnam veteran, and my grandfather, a gentleman who was a part of the American Great Migration, which I'll talk more here about.
And I'm Derek Miller. I am also a member of Fatherhood Network. I'm the creative director. I have 2 children, 2 boys, one 6, one 2-year-old. Married to a beautiful wife. I'm married up. And as you can see, I do some work with the county, and I'll get into that in a little bit.
Thanks, fellas. So let's dive in, shall we? So you can learn more about us at our website, www.thefatherhoodnetwork.org. We just had a little bit, I'm gonna have Jacob come up and share a little bit about our values. So the purpose of today is to share more about who we are as an organization, and then we're gonna dive into the conversation about plantation politics. So sit back, relax, and enjoy this conversation.
All right, so I'm not going to try to talk too much about this, but I just want to state that it's very timely that we are here for this conversation. In general, the Fatherhood Network values healthy, engaged men. And that means a lot of things. And so that is our goal, that we support every man and father in Kalamazoo in being their healthiest possible self. Some of our values in terms of community, we believe in and value our community. We value the worth of all community children and families. We believe in keeping children safe. We value the building of community among fathers, and that's something we work to do on a bi-weekly basis, is make sure that men and fathers know they have community. We believe in empowerment, that empowering fathers will build sustainably in our effort to engage and mentor one another. We believe in empowering fathers to become their own advocate, and we think that will provide economic empowerment and opportunities to improve the overall quality of life for families and fathers in Kalamazoo. We believe in equality, that a child needs both parents committed to being involved in their life. We believe in celebrating the diversity of men and fathers in our community, and are committed to supporting all fathers regardless of race, ethnicity, sexual identity, or other demographic factors. And so we'll move on here to the next slide.
Derek again. I want to talk a little bit about our work since 2014. In 2014, Fatherhood Network wasn't really established yet. It was still an idea. Kevin Lavender was meeting with local organization, Healthy Babies, Healthy Start, and talking about the need for fatherhood programming and that there wasn't anything out there. So what they planned to do was to host a few focus groups on all sides of Kalamazoo to gather some information. So within the span of a few months, we're able to get about decent showing of 10, 20 people at each side of Kalamazoo getting some information on what was needed for employment, housing, what kind of fatherhood help do you need? And with that information, they were able to get a grant written up. This grant was approved by United Way, and that actually became the catalyst for the For Dad Fatherhood program at Kalamazoo County Health and Community Services, which is where I work now. So since that approving of the grant, I've been at the county for 6 years, working with fathers very closely with other home visiting programs, being able to connect them with community resources and teach them about the development of their children from 0 up to 2 years old, and working very closely with the Fatherhood Network. So leading up to now, with support from Stryker Johnson and the Kalamazoo Community Foundation, the Fatherhood Network has its own funding where it's been able to start some of its own programming. Some of that includes one-on-one peer support, the family-friendly activities and events. We've been able to rent out a section of seats at the Growlers games where fathers can bring their whole family, mothers, children, everybody, and just being able to enjoy a game without having to worry about the cost. We've been able to rent out the Air Zoo, the Roller World, these different activities. So we're trying to find different activities that can engage every member of the family, whether it be the youngest to the oldest that might think they're too cool to hang out. So we try to engage everybody. We also hold the dad cafes. This is an opportunity where fathers all over the community can come and just engage in a conversation. We go through 24/7 dad curriculum. It's evidence-based, but it's used more as a talking guide where we're able to talk through these different points, see where everyone's perspective is coming from, and we never try to freeze someone where they are. We know that everyone is learning, everyone is growing, and it's a real iron sharpens iron experience where we're learning from them, hopefully learning from us. And I always say that if you're a parent, it's like flying an airplane while you're still putting it together. But if you get a bunch of us inside the same room, we can at least figure out what the next step is. And I think I'll go on to the next part.
Yes, again, it's all about building community and leaning into that, because within community, there's a lot of diverse perspectives, lessons learned, victories achieved, losses you had to tough through. And as fathers, we need that. We've been able to really find these vulnerable spaces where fathers and men are willing and able to be vulnerable. There's a wonderful, in the exhibit, there's a wonderful demonstration with the barbershop. Raise your hand if you've seen that yet. Yes, the barbershop. I find it very beautifully ironic that that's the first piece of the exhibit when you walk in. We have learned and found that the barbershop is one of the last frontiers where men and fathers are willing to be vulnerable. Therefore, we would have something called barbershop talks, where you can literally come get sharp and come get sharpened, right? Through conversation, through vulnerability. We've done everything from vision board creations with fathers, talking about economics, family, mental health, and sometimes just to hang out and watch another guy get his haircut and read a magazine. But it's about building the community. So I love that that's part of the exhibit. To me, that's proof that they know what they're doing here, all right? Some of the books of reference that we're going to talk about through today's discussion, we have by Dr. Latrice Rollins, the Engaging and Working with African American Fathers, Lessons Learned. Now, Dr. Rollins is leading a statewide fatherhood support effort in the state of Georgia. Georgia has very progressive fatherhood support efforts, as does the state of South Carolina. And we had the pleasure of traveling down to the Morehouse School of Medicine to connect with Dr. Rollins, and really was able to pick her brain on lessons learned and how can we apply it to the Kalamazoo dad context, which of course will involve other dads in that. Slavery, fatherhood, and paternal duty in African American communities. Much of the meat of the discussion will be referenced out of excerpts by Libra Hildy, the author. Phenomenal book. And then also, of course, our sister Bell Hooks. We real cool. Black men and masculinity. And so hope you enjoy the discussion. We don't stand up here as experts. We are continuous learners and engaged in this work and want to learn from others, but we're here to just share some of the things that stand out to us as it relates to our work with fathers in Kalamazoo. So up next, I'm going to call up my brother Ramil, who's going to give a brief overview of fatherhood in West Africa pre-transatlantic slave trade.
So, following my brother Kevin's comments about Fatherhood, pre-colonial transatlantic slave, which is kind of ironic because the fatherhood in West Africa during that time, before invasions of other cultures, is pretty similar to what every other culture does now, even here in America, besides what we are able to do today. So with that being said, some of the things would include the father's responsibility, first and foremost, was to protect, provide, and provision of his family. When it came to the children, the mothers, and daughters were typically paired together, where the mom would pretty much teach the younger women, the girls, about their daily duties within the family structure. The father's role was to teach the young men. The majority of the time of the young men were spent with the father. So with that being taught as relates to hunting, preparing meals for the wife or wives to cook, and also how to fight, defend. There's also a lot of articles and testimonials about how fathers were not only responsible for their children, but the children of the community, or the tribe, or whatever you want to describe that. So even men who did not have children had a father role in society during that time. So when you talk about men who may be young adults but don't have any biological ties to children, they have the same roles as a biological father or stepfather or surrogate father, however you want to categorize that. This is also a continuation of what we use today as "it takes a village," which originated in that traditional culture, and they refer to their homes as some homes as compounds at a particular time. So they would teach the son about how to, like I spoke about earlier, how to kill, get the food, protect the compound, and to basically get them prepared for when they are the head of the family, and head of their household. And even moving further in a technological era where you have the inclusion of medicine by Imhotep, the first medical doctor who successfully performed a brain transplant, amongst other things, in Nile Valley civilization. Men were pretty much teaching all sorts of things to their children in society: mathematics, chemistry, astrology, astronomy, and a plethora of different sciences, languages. So the impact and the role of fathers during that time period was very significant, and almost is seen as somewhat of a very 180 in today's society, particularly here in America, and even that of Europe and the UK. And I will pass this along.
Thank you, sir. So it's important for us to talk about pre-slave trade and then talk about the impact of it and how that has impacted Black fatherhood. So then we go from looking at characteristics of fathers in West African cultures, such as Ramil just shared, such as the ability to protect, the ability to provide, the ability to teach, the ability to advocate, the ability to train, the ability to love, the ability to extend all of that outside of your compound to the broader context of the village. You would think like, of course, right? But those are the very things that became under assault upon the slave trade. So we talk about Black father identity. We have to look at it, as Dr. Rollins has taught us, from a historical perspective. That is vital. And in doing that, we go from the slave ship to the auction block. Now, this picture was chosen because on the auction block, you see the Black family, right? Now turn from human to commodity, something that can be bought, sold, traded, insured, right? And also you see the Black father. Now look at the posture of the Black father. Arms crossed with almost the body language of, I am powerless in this situation. That becomes the embodied identity of the Black father in America upon the impact. We talk about ripple effect. If you've ever skipped rocks, if you've ever dropped a solid object in the water, it will cause a ripple, meaning the impact happens and then the continuation of that original thing is seen. So this is a ripple, or I should say, this is the impact. Okay? This conversation is not comfortable. It's not pretty. It's ugly. In fact, we talked about it as a team 2 days ago. This is ugly stuff. But in order for us to look at it historically, in order for us to find ways to grow, which we'll talk about at the end of this, like the now what scenario, we have to look at the original impact. So this is the auction block. This is a very feared space by enslaved Africans. This was seen as the point of no return, a permanent fixture in the life of the Black family. And that gesture of arms crossed is exactly how the experience of the Black father has been impacted, meaning the ability to have inability. Okay? So I'm going to bring and call Jacob up to talk a little bit more about the progression from this original impact.
Thanks, Kev, and thanks everybody. This is a great conversation. Like Kev said, it can get heavy, but such is the history of our nation and our communities. And when we talk about the socialization of men in our country, and Black men in our country, it can be uncomfortable. And so I just want to stop for a minute on that and just acknowledge that we have all been socialized, right? As men in our community, in our nation, lies about, what this idea of masculinity, manhood, and fatherhood is. And there's a lot of healing that, we need through this socialization. And part of the work of the Fatherhood Network is to offer to communities and community members and fathers in our community chances to heal. And so I too am a father. I have a 9-year-old daughter and a 4-year-old son. And so I just want to acknowledge too that we are fathers up here with daughters, right? And so this idea of manhood being tied to control, power, we are nurturers as well, right? I know a few of these brothers were doing their daughter's hair this morning, right? And so I just want to acknowledge that in the moment right here, right now. And so the context, right? We talked about West Africa specifically because we know a lot of the slave trade came from that, but family dynamics and fatherhood isn't just this singular thing, right? So I want to be careful when we just put out blanket statements around manhood, masculinity, fatherhood, and what that looks like. Because throughout history, there hasn't necessarily been one singular thing. And so we just got to be careful about that. But this term, Baba, right? So, and I'm diverting a little bit, but I think it's important. Brother Ramil talked about fatherhood in West Africa and how some men and fathers in the community, whether they were fathers or not, just assumed this role of elderhood, and the term is called Baba, right? So any man or father in the community is a Baba, is a father figure, no matter their blood relation. And so through colonialization and the slave trade, we were socialized more into this false idea of masculinity and manhood. And we were socialized through the pillars of slavery, white supremacy, our economic system, capitalism, specifically, right? And so Bell Hooks has a great chapter in the book we reference called We Real Cool Black Men, that is chapter 1, and it's entitled Plantation Patriarchy. And so she really just dives into this idea of Black men and fathers' experience in America and just how much that was birthed out of the plantation. And the remnants of slavery in our society as a whole, specifically this role of manhood, masculinity, and Black fatherhood is something that we really need to unpack. And so we could spend a lot of time on slavery in the plantation, but the assault doesn't stop there. And so I wanted to put up the Great Migration, Vietnam, or we can even talk about war as a whole, and it's tied to masculinity and this idea of manhood, right? Being a soldier and fighting for what's yours. In the civil rights era. And the reason I bring that up is because I think about my father and my grandfather. And so this idea of manhood, right? And Black manhood in America, and being able to voice your disdain, right? This idea of power and authority, right? We know that manhood and masculinity is way more than just power, control, and authority, right? But we were told that that generally is it, right? And so as Black men and fathers in America, one could argue that we haven't experienced much of that. And I want to share a story of my grandfather, Mabry Johnson, who I'm named after. And so folks may be aware of the Great Migration. And if you're not, that was a time in American history, specifically in the South, where African Americans were forced due to racial terrorism to move up north. And so my grandfather, Mabry Johnson, at the age of 13, as a young man, noticing what's going on around him in his community in Okolona, Mississippi, starts to voice his opinion and say, hey, I don't like what's going on here, as a young boy, 13. His mother says, son, you are going to get us killed. You voicing your opinion and disdain and feelings as a young man is going to get us killed, literally. So what did she do? It got to a point, and this is a story that I've been told, and there's similar stories in the African-American community, where it got to a point where my grandfather's disdain became so great that my great-grandmother had to sneak him out of town. And so she dressed him up in a wig and high heels and a dress and put him on the train to get out of town as quick as he could. Because there was a real threat for this young boy, my grandfather, coming into manhood, that if he were to show disdain or discomfort, the threat of violence, the threat of being killed was always there. And so that goes past the plantation. Then I want to move up and think about the story of my father, right? Born right here in 1945 in Kalamazoo, Michigan. And this idea of how has the social, political context affected manhood and masculinity for Black men in America through race, through our economic system, and through war and militarism. What Martin Luther King said, the 3 pillars, right? And so my father, being a senior in Kalamazoo Central, graduated and then was drafted to the Vietnam War and said, you need to come fight for a country where maybe you weren't necessarily giving all the rights and privileges that you should have, but we're going to strap you with an M16 and a grenade and say, go fight and kill other men on behalf of our nation, right? And so this idea of trauma in Black men and families and communities is something I also want to lift up, because I have letters from my father to the Army administration talking about having nightmares. And it was, he was talking about this thing they called Vietnam syndrome, right? And so this idea that through slavery, colonization, the Great Migration, and civil rights, Black families including Black men and fathers, have experienced trauma at such a rate that we really need to deal with this. And this is kind of some of our work. And it's tough work. But I just want to also acknowledge that it wasn't until the mid-1960s that we even had a word for trauma. And so nowhere through our work or conversation do we want to have a kind of father versus mother type of thing. Like I said, we realize as men, we have a lot of healing to do. And then we also have to realize how the socialization has in turn caused harm, right? Hurt people. And so one thing that we're trying to do with the Fatherhood Network, and I'll pass it on, is just redefine what the role of manhood and fatherhood is, right? And so in some of our dad cafes, we talk about what is the role of a father and a man? How does the role of a father differ from the role of a mother? Does it differ? And so I just want to leave us with kind of thinking about that. How has the social political context impacted masculinity, and how do we redefine masculinity? I don't want to talk much more. Sorry, I kind of got off on a tangent, but thanks, y'all.
Thank you, Jacob. In our work, we are working to create a counter narrative to the stereotypical images we see of Black men and Black fathers, meaning deadbeats. We don't care. We're just this innately toxic group of people that seeking to dominate, control, and not listen, learn, or nurture, because that hasn't been even our experiences. So we came up with this topic, the original deadbeat dad. The original deadbeat dad. This is quite a thing, because when you look at plantation politics, and we talk about what a deadbeat dad be, here's a list: someone who's negligent of their children, of their paternal duty, someone who doesn't provide, someone who would be abusive towards children or mom, not present, someone who would ignore paternal duty and blood or familial connection to children, someone who doesn't support mom during pregnancy, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Well, then when we put that and match it up with the plantation, the actual original deadbeat dad was not the Black father. Believe it or not. In our research, we discovered something called the Virginia Act of 1662, which basically, here's the timeline. 1607, Jamestown, Virginia was founded. 1619, the first African-American arrived in Jamestown, Virginia. That's also, ironically, when the Virginia General Assembly and the House of Burgesses was founded. That was the body that eventually passed this law of 1662, which in the Latin is partis sequitur ventrum, which means heredity follows the womb. Heredity follows the womb, okay? Whereas some doubts have arisen whether children gotten by any Englishman upon a Negro woman should be slave or free, be it therefore enacted that declared by this present Grand Assembly that all children born in this country shall be held bond or free only according to the condition of the mother. And so that automatically, by law, takes out the influence of the father. So we talked about that ripple, slave trade, auction block, right? Then not only that, father, you don't even have a voice or role in the heredity of your child. In fact, it was known that a slave was fatherless by law. Let that sink in for a minute. So what that allowed was for the womb of the Black woman to be used to create a labor force. I want to read an excerpt out of Slavery, Fatherhood, and Paternal Duty, page 149. The title of the chapter is called Tucky Buzzard Lay Me, Slavery, Sex, and White Fathers. It is the condition of the mother that makes the slave. As to the progenitor on the male side, he is rarely known as the father, in fact, never in law. Frederick Douglass is quoted by saying, slavery does away with fathers as it does away with families, and its laws do not recognize their existence in the social arrangements of the plantation. We go on to say, partus sequitur ventrum, offspring follows belly, and the 1662 Virginia Act that linked heredity and race through maternal reproduction and the bodies of Black women. So we talk about body autonomy. Well, if your body's being used as like a factory for production, where did it originate? If the status of the enslaved mother determined the status of her children, an enslaved man lost the patriarchal ability to confer status through his person. White men, meanwhile, could father children with enslaved women, and each child inherited her bondage and was transformed from kin to property. White men could bequeath their status to free children, exploit the bodies of enslaved women to generate property. White fathers of slaves owned their children as commodities, meaning that they were simultaneously erased as fathers and reified as paternalists. Quite an interesting dynamic. This picture was used as promotion for people to move to the state of Virginia. Well, hey, look, if you established in 1607, and then by 1619 you got the Virginia Assembly, and then by 1662 there's a law that says, hey, plantation owner, you can impregnate whoever and have no duty to provide, but also have the benefit of their ability to produce. So Virginia luxuries, one of the luxuries is you can have relations with slave women and then also beat their offspring. Where's the Black father in this dynamic? Non-existent, powerless. So this is a ripple effect. Very important. Let's look at some more dynamics of the politics. Slave master sexual behavior, we touched on that. Emasculation of the Black male. Again, I want to reference page 150 and 151. White men could not be accused or charged with rape for having sex with enslaved women, making consent a moot point. The law thus financially incentivized illicit sex with enslaved women and imposed no criminal impediments. Sexual access to slaves inevitably produced children, and these children were commodities white men had no legal obligation to support. Let's reimagine this concept of the original deadbeat dad, the original. A master could satisfy his sexual appetites and desire for dominance and turn a profit at the same time. Pretty good deal. I mean, if you're in that business, right? If you're in that industry. Let's look at page 59 of the same text, which the text is slavery, fatherhood, and paternal duty in African American communities over the long 19th century. Page 50. I'm sorry. Yes, page 50. And this touches on the emasculation part of the plantation politics. Power and sexual dynamics of slavery put all slaves in an excruciating position. If they attempted to protect one another, they risked physical punishment or sale, separating them from loved ones. If they did nothing, they suffered the emotional trauma of witnessing abuse at their own inaction. Enslaved men, now here again, the ability to protect. Remember the characteristics of West Africa. So here now that's under assault. Enslaved men keenly felt their inability to uphold masculine values by defending loved ones. It is, quote, it is the chattel relation that robs him of his manhood and transfers his ownership in himself to another. Let's skip over to page 59 briefly. For an enslaved man, being forcibly parted from a wife or child entailed not only a sense of loss, but also a reminder of his emasculation and ability to protect his kin. I feel like that's a take a breath moment. So it is important as we support Black fathers that we look at it from a historical perspective and understand that if you're asking yourself, how can I help? Support the Fatherhood Network, because that's the work we do. But even as simple as like, if you see a Black father protecting his child, his family, celebrate that. Celebrate it. Because that has been a ripple effect that has been under assault since landing. Manifesting paternal duty seen as an act of revolt and also a point of pride amongst enslaved communities. Page 69 and 70, excerpts from it. Slave communities articulated a robust vision of fatherhood and masculine duty that stood in opposition of their evaluation of slaveholders. The attributes former slaves most praised in their fathers, including rebelliousness, compassion, and providing for family, physical strength, skill, and intelligence, often combine components of heroic resistance and the subtle resistance of caretaking. Wow. When I read that, I was like, wow, the subtle resistance of caretaking. Meaning, these enslaved children, when they're asked of like, what's your earliest recollection of your father? I don't really know him, but I know he demonstrated heroic resistance by fighting back. He tried to defend me, gave his life. Or because any manifestation of masculinity or fatherhood was seen as a direct assault on the way of life, the subtle resistance of caretaking. So when I read that, I thought of my youngest queen, Naomi Michelle, holding her and feeding her bottle. And then, you know how baby, you feed them and they get the full belly, and then you do what? You burp them. And then she spit up on my shoulder. I was wearing a suit as before church. And I thought, wow, that would be seen as an act of resistance. Why would it be seen as an act of resistance? Because the very act or expression of fatherhood was seen as an assault. Thumbs up if you're with me. Okay. So it is vital to look at that. I'm going to end it with this, a quote from my brother Frederick Douglass. Page 54. So this is a narrative. Because fighting back directly presented risk, caretakers offered to take physical punishment for loved ones, an indirect form of resistance that enabled men to partially uphold their sense of duty to protect. So when we talk about Black father resilience, when you're stripped of your paternal duty, memories from your children are, well, they demonstrated a caretaker energy at risk of their life. That is profound. That's sickening. That makes me want to throw up. But it is what it is. And at the same time, I stand as a Black father proud of that resilience. Every time I pick up my babies, I kiss them on the cheek, I give them a hug, I pray with them before they go to bed, drop them off at school. Kind of a subtle act of resistance. If we are looking at it in the dynamic of plantation politics. I'm gonna call my brother Derek. I need a moment, but that's how real it is, and it was. So when we look at the unmasking masculinity, when we look at tapestries created with beads and beautiful colors, and we look at mock setups of the barbershop, and we see a punching bag with beads on it, and a message: "War is not the answer." In our community of Kalamazoo, if you see a Black father holding his child's hand, I would say let's be proud that can exist in our community. Yay! Yes. We celebrate Black fatherhood in Kalamazoo. There's a city proclamation that says we value fatherhood. That is an act of resistance too. And it is not only vital, it is honorable to celebrate Black fatherhood. Now that we have an understanding of the history, now we have an examination of the impact, now that we've seen some of the ripples of that plantation politic, we're still here. We're still here. And that should be celebrated as well. I'm going to call my brother Derek up because we want to talk about now what? What can be done now? And if there's time, we'll have obviously questions and go through it. Thank you.
So Kevin went over some pretty heavy stuff. When we were developing this presentation, didn't want to leave it on a note of just how many things have been done. We want to have a way forward. So now what? Now that you have this information, now that we've told you all of these things from these books and everything, now what are we going to do? As we've said, the Fatherhood Network moves to break these different stereotypes, these misconceptions of fatherhood. Supporting the Fatherhood Network, allowing us to come through and do conversations like this, as the KIA has done. That's support, these different things, avenues. That's a way that we can get these things out here. One thing I want to hit on really is a healthy way forward. When it comes to fatherhood or just raising a child in general, the fatherhood, it must be modeled. It must be something that is seen. You can't just tell them to do, or as I'm sure many have heard the term expressed to some young boys, be a man. Don't cry. And walk it off. Exactly. We're told these things, but you're never told what to do. You're never told how to be a man. You're told what to do. When it comes to sports, when it comes to anger, you're told what to do with it. Take your anger, point it at your opponent. You're not told how to handle it when you're in the community. I don't want to take up too much time, but when we look at how our children are socialized, generally taught how to be a mother or a father, when we look at young ladies, girls, really society does a very good job at telling them what to do and what to be from a very young age. What to be interested in. You play with dolls. This is your kitchen set. Take care of the baby. Do this, do that. You're teaching them how to become a mother early, as soon as they can walk. Young boy, what do you teach him? You give him a ball. You might give him some soldiers. You tell him you do sports. So you teach him how to fight, how to play sports. Nothing about fatherhood happens for him. Oftentimes, men do not learn about being a father until they get the news that a child is on the way. You have 9 months. So with that, I want to come back to the point of fatherhood must be modeled. When you see young men point them in the direction of the Fatherhood Network, point them in the direction of fatherhood programming so that they can see fathers that are trying, that are learning, that are nurturing. Going back to the plantation politics, keep in mind that fatherhood must be modeled. If it was taken away from them, the only model they had of a man was the plantation's master. They did not see fatherhood amongst their community that they were a part of. So you see if you have to model the fatherhood, that means all of those characteristics that we saw for the original deadbeat dad, that becomes the model. So once you take away, okay, now you are free, right? But you've erased any resemblance of fatherhood amongst those that look like you. So you go to the example that you were given. And we can see some of that still present in today. Fatherhood can be measured by how many women do you have? How much money do you have? How much property do you have? That is a lot of the social norm. So we're trying to break that. I don't want to go too far off in a tangent or anything, but just wanted to drive home the point that as we are participating in these conversations, or you see us doing something inside the community, just come through and show support, whether it be connection to other organizations so that we can either speak or learn from them, or just donate, honestly. Being able to make something happen. And I'm gonna start rambling again, so I'll just call it done.
Thank you, brother. So that was pretty much, those are our talking points for today. We want to thank you for your time, but also want to open it up. Do we have time for questions? Okay, so team, if you all want to come up, we can field any questions, ideas, thoughts, concepts. Did you learn something new? Yes.
I was in this conversation with a friend the other day, and their comment was, well, that was so long ago, it shouldn't apply today. Could you help me with a response to that? Because I really feel that a lot of white people feel that.
Yes.
Because it happened during slavery. You guys should have your act together by now.
Mm-hmm.
And I really want to give the right response.
Yes, I'm gonna pass the mic to Jacob, but I do want to respond with the question. So that was done so long ago. Why should we care now? You should have your act together. That was the comment/question. I'm summing it up, but just for our live stream on here. So I'll let Jacob take that. Great question.
Yeah, great question. Thank you. And this is very much a conversation about race and racism in America. And so I had mentioned that my father was a Vietnam veteran, right? And so for folks who went to war, we have this concept called post-traumatic stress disorder. And so what that means is when folks experience severely traumatic experiences, that science tells us and data tells us that there's ripple effects on the mind, the body, and the family. And so I experienced that with my father. He had PTSD. And we could argue that Black and brown folks in America who have experienced the violence of white supremacy experience post-traumatic stress. And so I would offer that as a response to friends and family.
And to also give some context, to follow up what my brother Jacob has said, the conversation surrounding emotions and how they affect our DNA is passed down through generations. So I'm sure we all have children that have the emotional capacity of someone whom we're related to, but has passed on, but they act just like them. That's kind of where I would add that into the response as well, because emotions travel through generations, and how folks respond to particular situations. They may not be aware that that is a trigger, or why they respond the way that they do, or why they feel the way that they feel. But it's also important to understand that emotions um, does not leave a family legacy until it is fixed.
Please.
You might want to also add the context of think of how long American history is, right? It's 246 years, and there's been approximately 156 years. So when you see how the Reconstruction era happened, right? There were all these programs that were built to like repair this breach, but then that only lasts for about 30 years. And what then happens after that 30 years is that there's a lot of work that undoes the laws that were enacted to help repair the breach. So then you go into the segregation era. So maybe just talking about it from that perspective, because then you know when you get back to segregation, which is also called Jim Crow, it's almost another form of slavery that is enacted. So until you get true civil rights is go for it, the 1960s. Now what is this, 2020? So 60 years. 60 years. So like 60 years of maybe having an equal playing field.
Yeah.
And even if you think about it from the perspective of after slavery, people had land, people had other things. There were things that were done. You can look at the incarceration system. If you didn't have a job, you could be put in jail. Like, and so if you're free, and you just tell people like, oh, you're free. You don't. Where do you go? You stay on the land that you've always known and you work it. And there's just so many other dynamics that you have to like look at historically, look at the time frame. How do you going back to what the gentleman said about memory? Knowing that whatever happens to a mother while she is pregnant with her child happens to the child also. So you do get that generational trauma that's been passed down for 256 years.
And that's current too with the Black women today, medically proven that they still have subpar care and the infertility rates.
So just thinking about it from that perspective, just think about the time. I mean, the time frame. It takes a long time when you have just one moment of trauma. How long does that take to undo it? It can take a lifetime for one person to undo the trauma.
Yes.
And to add to that, that perfect, thank you. But to add to that, yes, it was done that long time ago, right? But we have buildings from that time that are still standing now. Do you know why? Because their foundation, how they're built. It might have happened then, but it doesn't mean that it has fallen. It means that everything has just been built around it. So there are different structures in place that keep it there. Now, you might not see people riding around on horses with hoods now, at least not out and about, right? But I mean, now you see people those same people are just wearing a suit.
During slavery, families were separated, so the children might not ever see their parents. Either one, do you find that the children were very traumatized under these books,
The question was, I'm sorry.
being separated?
Yes. Were the children in the enslaved communities traumatized from the family separation? Is that correct? Yes, absolutely. Again, the auction block was seen as one of the most feared spaces. Also, the children, there have been stories of the children so here's the generational trauma part. And you can also respond to your friend by just saying, remember the ripple, right? Like, so children would avoid situations of drawing their fathers into what would require them to respond from a fatherly response, because they had already embodied the fear of them being killed. Meaning, say if a young girl was violated by a young boy walking to the store, she wouldn't go say, "Daddy, that boy touched me." She just wouldn't say it because she knew Dad would respond and draw him in, but she knew if he did that, he'd be dead. So again, it's a constant assault on the actual expression of paternal duty is under assault. So yes, the children feared that because they understood if they were protected from it, Daddy could die. If they weren't protected from it, they may be in a situation where their dad is still alive, but they will never know him. So
They also never saw the mother. The mother was separated too.
yes.
So they were like orphans, basically.
Yes, and there was no protection for our Black sisters, and we have to remember that. There's a story, I won't read it, but Josiah Henson, he was working in the field. He heard the slave master whipping his wife. He went to defend her, beat the slave master up, was about to kill the slave master. His wife intervened, said, no, thanks for protecting me, but I'm good. The slave master got up and said, hey, let's forget this ever happened. I overreacted. There will be no punishment for you for defending your wife. They go back to the plantation headquarters. Of course, slave master goes back on that. And here was the punishment for him defending his wife. He was to receive 100 lashes on the bare back while his right ear was nailed to the whipping post. And after the 100th lash, his ear was to be severed to be a permanent reminder of what happens if you ever think you're going to protect your family. Yes.
Can I ask a question, just going back to what Mr. Miller said earlier? He was talking about the idea of socialization with motherhood and saying, like, you know, from the time you're like as far as girls indoctrinated to be caretakers and be mothers. So my question to you is, do you think then that maybe there's an opportunity to have conversations with the toy industry? Because just like there are dolls, I mean, like, why can't a boy have a baby and a carriage and take care of a baby? Like, why would that be so controversial? And so my question to you is, are you thinking of ways to sort of talk to businesses that have toys for children to sort of have gender toys that help with that sort of idea?
This ain't wired, this, big brother. Okay. That is a great question. Yes, the marketing and everything that goes behind that you're talking about companies that have made a lot of money doing this. Having talks directly with these companies and organizations, I can't say that we've had that conversation. We've done more talking with the fathers about really how to connect with your children and talking about that, like just off the top of my head, like the color pink. Color pink traditionally is something that's associated with young ladies, girls, but honestly, it's just a color. If your son likes the color pink, they like the color pink. I've seen people rock pink and they look good.
Yeah.
So.
Like the time my 4-year-old son took his big sister's pink tutu and put it on and wanted to twirl like his big sister. And so part of the conversation, we'll kind of end it on this, is also as fathers, how do we socialize our children? Me and Derek also have young boys around manhood, right? My son likes playing with the kitchen set. Cook it up. And so that's another part of this work that I just want to lift up as we kind of close out. We have a duty as men and fathers to also help support the next generation around maybe pushing back, but also expanding the narrative, but also being an example around what we feel like healthy fatherhood is, but also not necessarily putting as many limits maybe as some of the fathers before us. I do realize it's 1 o'clock, Kelly. I don't know if you wanted to end on anything or if we had any more questions, but just want to say thank you all.
Thank you all.
again.
Yeah, appreciate your time.
And I want to give a special shout out to brother in the back here. Who is that with the hat on? Oh, that's Alfonso. Alfonso attends a lot of our father meetings and is a great community advocate. So shout out Alfonso.
Thank you all.